All right, Patrick. When are we getting our official Switch from Nintendo?
No idea. I can certainly say this with full confidence as of this recording. No sense of when and if Nintendo will be doing any sort of review access to the Switch 2. This kind of came out originally a week or two back from the Game Business. Really good, like business-centric newsletter about video games. If like you do care about things like concurrence and all that, but like would like it like written correctly, I highly recommend reading Game Business or thegamebusiness.com. Anyway, Christopher Dring over there mentioned that talking to some press, seems like mostly in the UK, but my understanding this is pretty much true of the US as well. According to the Game Business, the Game Press will not be receiving Nintendo Switch 2 consoles until just before it comes out. The Game Business has learned. Some media have even been warned they will not have the machine until launch day. Nintendo has told journalists this is due to a requirement of a significant day one patch. Alongside that, to no great shock, Switch 2 units have started arriving at retailers. When this comes out, will be less than a week from the launch of the Switch 2. And folks who have acquired an early Switch 2 have turned it on, and it's basically a brick without access to a significant day one patch. The theory behind that is that Nintendo has been stockpiling like stock of this machine for a very long time, like as far back as like early fall, and so it wouldn't be terribly surprising to learn that the firmware on there is something that's like 9 months out of date, and that may not function entirely properly. But yeah, this is a unique situation in which, like, I suppose a device that seems very familiar, Mario Kart World, very familiar, but in the past, one of the hoops at least game companies tried to jump through was, hey, like alongside the launch, there'll be sort of a critical analysis of the thing we're asking you to spend money on. And in this case, maybe it is for practical reasons where they just cannot get this patch ready in time for launch, and thus sending out an early Switch 2 to press would be functionally useless. But seems like poor planning on their part, or, as is entirely possible, Nintendo just does not care, knows what they have in the Switch 2, and they also know that every outlet will be covering it as soon as they're able to acquire one, either on day of or soon after. But
their review progress is in the CMS.
And hubris that precedes a Waterloo. Maybe they will discover what it means to court the enmity and the ire of the games press.
The extremely powerful games press that will bring Nintendo to their knees. I mean, it's just one of the, do I think it is the end of the world that there are not Switch 2 reviews at launch? Like, I can already read in my head a lot of what the Switch 2 is going to be. I can probably already... I could sort of half write a Mario Kart World review in my head, and I think most of it would line up with what that game actually is. That said, like, Nintendo aside, and we've talked about this before, like, we have seen a precipitous decline, like, alongside, like, the video game press as an institution sort of getting, like, distributed into, like, smaller clusters. Video game companies, like, doing their own presentations without press included, directly consumer facing. I think this is in a long line of the video game industry moving in a direction in which they don't see, hey, checking in with the press, like having an independent analysis of the work that they're doing and what they're asking people to pay for. We don't have to do that anymore. We don't have to answer your questions. We'll just directly talk to consumers, and like that's good enough. And I think we're losing something in the process. Like, not having a digital foundry analysis when the Switch 2 comes out, like, is a loss. Like, not having people put through the various elements of the Switch 2, like, through its paces, like, is game chat, like, as ugly and horrendous as it seems to look in the presentations that Nintendo has done, like, is a loss. Which webcams can I purchase for the Switch 2? They said it'll be compatible with USB webcams. What the hell does that mean? Can I just plug in the one that's in my computer, or am I getting a specific list? All these, like, there was a lot of conversation of, like, which SD micros to, like, buy to put in your Switch. Like, Which ones should I get? A bunch of like, it's just a lot of fundamental questions that I don't think they range from important to trivial, but also have been part of this song and dance before. And I think the media is not owed early access. Nintendo can do what it's want. This is not a situation where like, give me a free Switch 2 or give others a free Switch 2. I just think there is a institutional loss in what has happened in like the last 10 years or so that results in one of the biggest hardware launches of the decade essentially missing anything more than like a casual preview pass by like, oh, I got to play Donkey Kong Bonanza already. Like you had access. It was a time-limited 15-minute demo in which I was like pushed off it if I went like, can I just like see around this corner? Oh, well, no. Like it's over. There's no one else here. There's no one else here. Like, can't I just keep playing? No, you can't. And that's because that's how they had the thing set up. But I think it is a loss. It is not the greatest loss in the world, but I do think this is not something the press has like willingly given up. But I think it is part of a trend in which we are watching game companies hand over access to the most friendly possible places, with some rare exceptions, and that sucks.
Yeah, I think it also is going to make the coverage just inherently worse. It's also going to make everyone's lives who's covering it really bad because you still need to get that thing up as quickly as possible. So it's going to be like all hands on deck. It already is kind of a crunchy time to do a console launch because there's a lot of different content that needs to be made. And I think most people do try to like, do their best no matter what. But if you were going to do your best on anything, it would be a Nintendo Switch 2 review because that thing is going to get a lot of traffic. You could be nobody and it's still going to get a lot of traffic because that people want to see it. They're curious. They want to compare stuff. Like that's sort of part of the whole song and dance. So it's going to be a mad scramble to get stuff up. And that's what's kind of nice about having an embargo. We talked, I think even, it might even be the last week and the time all blurs together. But recently we were talking on the show about writing and deadlines and how that can drive you in a positive way to like get your work done. And I think embargoes often function the same way where it's like, okay, we all know on this time, on this date, we're all dropping our content. We have these different angles. And yeah, you're losing, like you brought up, Patrick, so much more than just review content, but like ancillary feature pieces. There's a lot of guides content that goes up around a console launch. So I think people don't think about because sure, for you, you're fine to like look around your settings and things, but for a lot of other people, they're like looking up information, like how to do everything with the console. And then there's like stuff you might not think about. And it's like, how could I do that if I wanted to do it? And then testing it out, making sure it works. Like there's just an immense amount of work. And it kind of sucks just how media is in general. This isn't even like a, related necessarily to the decline of games media, but just inherently like the way the system's set up, there isn't, press isn't like owed anything, it doesn't get anything, which has its pros. Like I do think it's nice that like people that make their games, even though it's not necessarily the developer really, but theoretically people making the games can decide like who gets access to their games. They don't have to get out code if they don't want to. And I think that's appropriate in the sense that it is like their artistic work. However, there's a reason that sports media has it where they have to like talk to the media, even if they aren't saying anything, they have to talk to the media. And as much as like, that's kind of like a crappy part of like an athlete's job sometimes, right? They don't always want to do that. But the pro of that is that you can get that content and that coverage. You can bridge the gap between the public and, these workers, creatives, athletes, whatever, like, and they have that built in. We don't have that. So there is like a lot of, I think, negativity that comes with that in terms of like losing coverage, in terms of having crunch, in terms of, I'm sure there are, I feel like I've never worked at a place that pulls punches in fear of getting coverage pulled, but I've also had the privilege of working at a lot of places that have a good amount of sway. I think it just inherently how the industry is set up, it makes for worse content. The content is worse, the content is lesser, and the content is made under less good work circumstances because of how the fact that we don't really have any. It's like, I hope you give me a code. You don't? Okay, well, I guess I'll just scramble to like review this or review it slowly on my own time, and then it's like less relevant. So, it's just kind of unfortunate the way things are. We even talked about that with access too. There's not even like a normal, you want to be cover the Lakers, you can get credentialed, and you get credentialed through like a website and da-da-da-da. Like there's no like, how do I get credentialed as like a Nintendo critic? Like, it's like, I don't know, like think good thoughts. maybe someone will meet you and they're like, oh yeah, you could, yeah, sure, I'll put you, like, there's not really any, there's no good formalization for like these things, even though formalization isn't really a word, but you get what I mean. Granted, also a really young industry, but also like an industry that's also struggling. So it's really just a mess. And I think this, it sucks, it's negative, and it's part of Nintendo's continued process of being like, we don't fuck with anybody. Like, they stopped fucking with people once that Pokemon Sword and Shields, and they're like, you're asking questions, people were mad at us. I didn't like that. I didn't like any of that. We're kind of just, and again, Pokemon Company is totally different than Nintendo, but they're, work closely together. Yeah, so that sucks.
Yeah, like even in sports, like there's a similar dynamic. Like sports has this like legacy, and I think it's kind of protecting sports media to some extent is going back like a century of sports coverage, because the rise of like sports as mass consumer entertainment sort of coincides with newspapers in a lot of ways. So you have this legacy of like media availability and having to go like talk to the press and go face the critics, the local sports columnists, even as a lot of those people have dropped out. But even in sports, you see a similar thing where athletes have discovered, well, we can just have our own podcast and we can just go and speak directly to fans. Now, different fans, but it has like, even that has sort of changed the dynamic there, where everyone would prefer everyone would prefer and frequently feel they get more of what they want out of not going in front of an adversarial intermediary between them and the public, and instead speak to a self-selecting group of people who are sort of identifying as fans or enthusiasts of whatever it is you are doing. And a lot of times that is harmless enough, but there's real shortcomings, especially when you start coming up against more real world issues where there are conversations that really can't be appropriately had on like a dudes hanging out podcast, in the sports world, and there's conversations that can't be appropriately had in a 5-minute pre-recorded developer chat on YouTube straight to the audience. It is helpful to have people there who can sort of ask those questions directly, and I think the double-edged sword of this in some ways, for maybe not necessarily Nintendo, but developers, I think in this sort of paradigm, is that you don't have to engage with adversarial press, but you do have to worry about a community brigading the shit out of you or just going berserk over they're not happy about something, and now you've chosen to go, like you said, this is where we do our business. This is where we're going to go talk to the audience. Right? We connect with people on Reddit AMAs. We talk to our YouTube community. We don't need the games press, and that all works well until it doesn't. And then it's like, oh my god, like these platforms are on fire, and sometimes it's deserved, a lot of times it's not, right? Like a lot of times developers are finding like, wow, like we're encountering a lot of unreasonable, angry people who are ostensibly our fans, but now they're not our fans. They're like our biggest haters. And that is not a dynamic you get with games media, because kind of the no cheering in the press box thing, right? That's not to say people can't be petty assholes in games media, or there's not tiers of that thing, but like there's that expectation that people will ask the questions they want to ask, they'll ask the follow-ups, they'll sort of engage in that like professional to professional level. Once you take that conversation out of that realm and you're just like, we're talking straight to the people through these platforms that award mass behavior, then occasionally that can go a different direction. And I don't think it's a concern for Nintendo being in a position of strength when it comes to launching something like the Switch 2. But I do think the more you set the precedent that we don't need to talk to these people, we can just like speak directly to our fans and not have uncomfortable conversations, we can control the message. Yeah, but those are also the platforms where the message can be taken out of your hands in ways that can't really happen in a sit-down interview, and or with a piece of games criticism. It's an exchange they've been happy to make. Those platforms have bigger reach, and it lets them sort of throw red meat to the faithful to mix metaphors, but that's the path they've chosen. It sucks along a few axes, and just from the standpoint of having done this job, like, really, you're not giving us the goddamn hardware? We're gonna have to go dig. We're gonna have to go find this shit so we can review it.
Dumpster diving.
There's gonna be people who are like
Switch to.
One of the silliest critiques from people who hate Games Press, because it always sort of gives the game away that you have no idea what you're talking about, is you just want your free games. You just want your free. Buddy, this shit's work. There's a moment in your career where you're like, oh my god, I have a launch console and the launch games.
It is cool. It is undeniably cool.
Yeah.
Like a cool part of the job. Getting the PlayStation, PlayStation 5 launches, first year of COVID, getting that early, playing Demon Souls, fucking cool. I'm not gonna sit here and be like, that wasn't cool. But also then a week later, I just have a PS5 like everybody else, and it's like, but your PS5 demands you do more work for it. Yeah. Everyone's got their PS5, and you're like, all right, you've got the PS5, you gotta go cover this. So it becomes in very short order just kind of a tool you need to do your job, and it's disdain for the job conceptually, right? A running current of that is what you do isn't actual work, and sprung from that is you can see the argument, how one makes the arguments for all of this, right? You're getting a free game. No, I'm getting access to a tool to do my job. Oh, you just feel entitled. No, part of the underlying fundamentals of many video game websites is because of SEO, having a initial early landing page on a Mario Kart World game guide, because that's going to end up fueling the salaries of the people that do actual report. You know what I mean? It is all of a part. But I think if you start from the place of the folks who look at that with an eye roll, it comes from the premise of, I do not think your job is real. I think it is silly. It is not actual work. And thus, why should you have access to any of the toys that I would like to have?
Also, why you and why not me?
Why you and not
is
me?
The other?
Yes.
Is it because no one wants to watch my streams or read my articles? I don't know. Yeah. So I think there's also a lot of definitely jealousy for the anti-games media stuff, and then also of course the silliness of, traditional media is not where it's at.
It's definitely expertise to a certain extent, right? Look at the popularity of an Asmongold or something like that. There is a rise in culture in which the everyman who just speaks their mind, that's the person I trust, and actually someone who identifies themselves as an expert in a field is someone to distrust, and that is across culture, and it's hardly exclusive to video games.
Which obviously, I think a lot of the people that fall into that camp probably aren't listening to the show. I think a lot of people listening, already in the.
But maybe a gift sub to Remap Radio.
Gift a sub to someone who has a toxic feeling towards games media, and then skip to this part in particular. One thing that's really funny about that is the everyman is no longer the everyman the second they become a content creator, which I think is funny. I think it's really funny that there are people who, using my fiance Isaiah, for example, he just started making content with me a while ago when we started the podcast. And, he's been on content before, here and there. But it's funny because there are people who, before, making that podcast would be I don't want to listen to Janet. I'm listening to Isaiah. He's a real gamer. He's not doing it for work. He's doing it for the love of the game, not for a job, right? The love of the game, if people remember that. Well, that was Michael Jordan's book, right? It was called Love of the Game. Anyway. Which I read many times. Anyway, but the second that he goes onto a podcast, so a lot of people would still conceptualize him as an everyman, but on a technicality, he's not, because he's making the second you start making content, you're not that guy. But I think the genius of that is that people don't have critical
performance.
thought.
Yeah.
So they're like, well, no, this is it's just like my friend. It's like, but they're not your friend because they're on content. Like your friend doesn't make edited TikTok videos like this. Like this is a content creator. Like, and you could argue, oh, content creator by the which sure that you could argue that if you want to. Like I wouldn't, but you can. But they're not like a regular. Like you stop being a regular person when you become media or content creation because a regular person doesn't do those things.
No one cared who I was before I donned the microphone.
Exactly. It's really funny that people have that concept of YouTubers because even though from the very brief things I know about Asmongold, I wouldn't necessarily look at him as but he is making content.
I would say.
Yes, I hope not. I hope not. I always on Everyman, but yeah, something too. I just wanted to give a nod to as far as like players, like athletes talking directly to people. I was googling around for this. The Players Tribune is I think a fun example of players talking direct, where it's, if people aren't familiar, it's a really cool website. It's run by athletes and it's like written by athletes. I mean, I'm sure they have like maybe some editing help and things like that, but it's just a lot of just kind of feature pieces of them wanting to, tell a degree of their story. And I think it's kind of a nice in between those things, because a podcast is always gonna be more general where you're kind of just like hanging out, but these are like crafted pieces, like it's just kind of a cool thing. And to that end, I'm not, against people, again, having a degree of like freedom, right? I think that's generally nice. We'll generally sign up for that. But yeah, media just doesn't really have like any guaranteed access. And with lack of guaranteed access, a lot of variables come into play that I think can negatively impact both media and the coverage they do. But yeah, this really goes back to Nintendo being in their we're on our own thing era. And they really launched that too with their like the news vertical they have in their app.
Yeah.
Is that in their app? Yeah, right? Where they're like, we're going to be giving you information directly.
It doesn't go to the press. There's no press release that goes along.
No.
Like, oftentimes,
and they're chatty.
Yeah.
They're posting all the time.
Every
and it's
day.
like, I do not care. I'll see it on social, like reposted by like someone else. And it's always like the most like, I'm sure sometimes the information will be good, but it's like the most minute. It's the most minute, dry. Like, if you pitch this to an editor, they'd be like, look, man, just don't hit your quota today. Like, you don't got to write this. Like, this level of, like, it's of, like, nothing. So, yeah, I think they set that up for a reason. And, we'll see how this Switch 2. Hopefully this is not an indicator of a continued lack of, like, codes for major I hope this doesn't go further than it's already gone.
So.
But
I think it is entirely possible. Like, I think it is in the realm of possibility that they're like the original Switch had a day one patch, and the Switch 2 has a substantial patch because of like the way it is. Like, I think it's possible like there is a very innocent reading of it. I worry about the precedent and the response to like folks being like, this is unfortunate. My suspicion is like what will end up happening is that there is a handful of outlets that have gotten like either invited to Nintendo or to like select events where it's like, here, bring your capture machines. Like you could like do your work over like the next week, but it all has to happen here because this is the only way we can let you get access to what is going to be a functionally day one Switch 2. That's just me speculating. I suspect there will be a handful of like big outlets, legacy outlets that sort of get that kind of access, and everyone else is like, look, there's just no way for us to facilitate that. And then we move towards sort of how Nintendo has always operated in sort of a tiered structure of favoritism going forward. But
is it in the fly us out tier?
No, we did not go to Universal Studios to interview Shigeru Miyamoto.
Damn.
Sadly not.
What's on that
Patrick,
Nintendo app
what's
today?
What's your plan to get back on the up the tier list?
Up the tier list? I mean,
Yeah.
well, funny enough, when I went to the Switch 2 event, I picked out...
You fucked Toad.
I picked up my little badge and had my name on it. The outlet that was on there was not Remap. It was Crossplay.
Ooh.
But I talked to Nintendo through my... Oftentimes, like I have different emails for both of those things. Like,
Yeah.
But sometimes there's... Like, I'll get an email from someone who's like, hey, actually, this makes more sense, blah, blah, blah. And I try to differentiate those two, but sometimes Nintendo operates in between. I didn't ask them to do that. They made that choice. So, Remap, like, the way of getting Remap better access is me
doing children's
writing
content.
about children and how they interact with
Yeah.
Nintendo. But
Yeah.
so far, It got us invited to the Switch 2 event, but it has not gotten us a Switch 2 quite yet. Though
So that's the trick. If you make enough verticals of content,
Yes.
it's like one of these are gonna pop up.
one of these they're going to care about, right?
There's gonna be a Janet Garcia. Is it Pen to Pig? Is it Remap? Is it Minmax? Honestly, on my was it SGF last year? I went to the Xbox event. They had like almost all my outlets on there. They had like Minmax / Pen to Pixels / Kind of funny, which was funny because I'm like, I actually don't work at Kind of Funny anymore. But it's still, I'm like, not according to this badge. Like, I don't know. Patrick, before we move on, I gotta know what's on the Nintendo app today.
Well, I had a I didn't read the agreement.
You had to
but I
re-download it?
just
Accept all the
agreed to.
cookies. Just kind of
I accepted it. It was
sign
like,
up
you
for
need
the
to agree to this in order
newsletter.
to
Like,
sign back in. So I'm finishing. Come on, accept the 2-step verification. I agree.
I can't imagine like that there were some kids growing up like how we had magazines. They're like every day I would open the Nintendo app and see the new news, and that's when I was inspired.
Wednesday, the Icon Element event. Game Boy, Nintendo. No, that doesn't look. These are missions and rewards. Oh, the news.
Okay, yeah.
By binocular view of the world, number 5. It is a.
Yeah, I did see that. Yep.
It is a video from Mario Kart World.
Yeah, of the fact that you can go into the little
You can
binoculars
go
and like
into
look around,
binoculars, and
like
then
like
you
in
can
3D World
Look around.
or Land.
Yes.
Nice. So anyway, you lose some, you gain some, and this is what we have. That's what we have left.